Hi Year 9, welcome to your presentation about History GCSE at Ponte de Lais Comprehensive School. I'm just going to take you through some of the things that we study should you choose to take history at GCSE with us. So first of all, our first unit is Depression, War and Recovery, 1930 to 1951. And this starts off by looking at the Depression in the 1930s and how it affected people's lives. We look at things like means tests, the hunger marches, and how people coped with day-to-day life during times of depression and poverty. We then move on to look at the Second World War and how people coped on the home front with that. So we look at campaigns like the Dig for Victory campaign and the Spitfire campaigns. We look at how people kept morale up during this time. We look at the Blitz and the bombing of British cities, in particular Swansea. And before finally, in the last couple of key questions, looking at how the country coped with the end of the war. How did we rebuild the country after it had basically been flattened by German bombers? And how the Labour government that came in after the Second World War brought in things like the NHS and the welfare state that tried to help people, and how people responded to that. We then move on to Unit 2, which is also with 25%. Okay, this is USA and Nation of Contrast, 1910 to 1929. We start this by looking at immigration and how lots of people from lots of different countries moved into America and how that affected American society. We then move on to look at things like race and religion. We look at the dominance of the Ku Klux Klan and the intolerance that was created by them and their ultimate decline. We then look at the prohibition and the banning of alcohol, basically, and Al Capone and gangsters and how on earth the gangsters managed to be so successful during this time. How did they manage to have such dominance over the country? We move on then and we look at Hollywood and popular culture and films and the development of music and the jazz age and that kind of thing and dance-offs, before actually then looking at women and the role of women in America and how they changed from the housewife to the flapper essentially over the First World War. And then our last unit of examined work, Unit 3, which is the big one, it's worth 30%. We're going to be looking at crime and punishment from about 1340 to the present day. Now, we look at three different elements here. We look at crime and how it's developed, punishment, and policing. So we look at how crimes have changed, at how in the time of Henry VIII, you could be beheaded for treason for even thinking about the death of the king, and how people were put in the pillory and the stocks and that kind of thing for certain crimes like heresy or crimes like treason. And what different crimes were during that time, because there were some very, very unusual types of crimes during that time. We then look at punishment and how it's changed from your capital punishment like beheading and hanging, and painful punishment like putting people in the stocks, the pillory, whipping, that kind of thing, and how it's moved from then to ultimately the system that we've got now, which is prison and reform, and how it's changed over that massive period of time. And then we look at policing and how there wasn't really a police force in the 1340s, and what passed for a police force. How did people police themselves, and how that's developed from having one constable in a town to now having a nationwide police force that works globally with other people. So the development of the police and how the police has developed from basically being one person to a whole police service. And that's worth 30%. And lastly, our controlled assessment unit, so our non-examined assessment, which you will do under controlled conditions in a certain amount of time in class, is life in the 1960s. We look at how life changed for young people during this time. Did it change at all? We look at popular culture, things like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, how they became popular, film and cinema. And we also look at whether or not the 1960s were a time of change or were they a time of continuity. We look at women. We look at things like authority, politics. Did things change during the 1960s? And that's worth 20%. And that is 2 essays, as I said, split into a certain amount of time done in class with me. Okay, and that basically gives you an overview of history at Ponte de Lais Comprehensive School. Any questions, please come and ask me, Mrs. Bennett, in H2, and I'm more than happy, or send me an email, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.